Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimas.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher, and this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And speaking of being viewer-supported, if you want to support resources like this show, be sure to find us and support us at reasons.org/2819.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. Give us a like, a dislike if you feel like you need to, but hopefully not. And maybe even leave a comment.
And we'd love to hear from you too on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. Leave us a good word.
And don't forget, you can get the podcast version of 2819. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and Spotify. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast. You can find us there.
This month, we have an exciting new resource just for you. It's by astrophysicist and 2819 host Jeff Swearink.
In his new book, Escaping the Beginning, Jeff tackles the big question, does the universe actually have a beginning?
So from now through the month of October, you can get your copy of Escaping the Beginning. Just visit reasons.org/2819.
We hope you get that resource, but now, time for a rundown.
I thought it was time. All right. In our Nexus segment, we're going to hear from RTB visiting scholar Kenny Rhodes, and he's going to answer the question, does religion appeal to only the marginalized?
And in Culture Talk, Sandra will be talking with Justin Brierley from the Unbelievable podcast. He was visiting from the UK, happened to stop in the studio, so it was great having him here. He's going to be talking about 3 reasons why belief in God makes sense.
And in our Give and Take segment, we're going to hear from astrophysicist Jeff Swearink. He's talking with chemist Darren Williams about whether quantum mechanics allows for uncaused events.
But first up, we have RTB 101. Astronomer Hugh Ross will be answering the question, what do scientific discoveries tell us about God? Let's check that out.
Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to help equip you to share your faith more effectively. Here to help me make a connection between the scientific evidence for God and understanding God's nature is astronomer and pastor Hugh Ross. And Hugh, most of us are familiar with RTB's materials and resources that we supply that help offer evidence that there is a designer, that there is a God. But is there any scientific evidence that can help us to actually get to know God and who He is?
I'm glad you brought that up, Sia, because what we offer is not just evidence for a God, but evidence for the specific God of the Bible. The scientific evidence is more than powerful enough to establish what kind of God is behind creation.
So, is there anything personally that we can learn about Him, about His attributes, or from science itself and not just from Scripture?
Well, the fine-tuning is a good way to go. We look at the fine-tuning of the universe, our galaxy, the Earth, and Earth's life, and what we discover is the measure of fine-tuning design we see in those different features is many, many orders of magnitude beyond anything that we human beings are capable of. Literally more than a trillion times greater.
That's a lot.
At a minimum, okay? Which establishes that the creator of the universe is at least that many times more intelligent than we are, that many times more educated than we are, more knowledgeable than we are, that many times better funded and more technologically equipped than we are. And so this actually separates the God of the Bible from the gods of the major competing religions. But we can press it farther. When you look at the fine-tuning, we see that it's specifically targeting human beings. I mean, you get one level of fine-tuning that makes microbes possible, but the level of fine-tuning you need to get plants and animals is orders of magnitude greater, and many, many orders of magnitude greater to get human beings, which tells you that this is a God that has a special focus on humanity, that we are the highest of God's creation. But I think it can press it even further, and something we've been developing in our latest books, is that every component of the universe, Earth and Earth's life, is fine-tuned, designed to make possible the redemption of billions of human beings within just thousands of years. So it tells us we're not only looking at a very intelligent, knowledgeable, powerful, creative God, but a loving God whose desire and mission is to bring redemption to billions of human beings.
Now, that's interesting. To look at that science would reveal a loving God. Can you just unpack that aspect just a little bit more?
Well, the provision that we see for humanity and human civilization is extravagant. I mean, God has provided in a great abundance so that we can not only enjoy life here, but thrive, and not just thousands of us, but billions of us, and develop high technology civilization. I mean, it's kind of like the analogy I could use with, say, my boys when they were really little. Mm-hmm. They would measure my love by how expensive the toys I bought for them and how many toys I bought for them. Well, in a very crude sense, we see that with the God that's provided this amazing universe, Earth, and the fact that every life form on Earth actually plays a role in providing for our existence and our ability to thrive, and particularly for our capacity to discover our need for redemption and the recognition that God is the only source of that redemption. We can see all that through creation. And it's not just modern science that brings that about. You know, one of the books I wrote, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, actually shows you how Job, looking at nature from his perspective of thousands of years ago, could discern that there had to be a redeeming God behind it all. Mm. And so all of humanity has been exposed to this evidence through creation. And this is really what separates the God of the Bible from the gods of all other religions. It's a God who redeems us from our sin and evil, which we're unable to do for ourselves.
Wow. And you can
get all that from the book of nature.
That's amazing. Bringing this all together and making it applicable to us and practical, how can we take this scientific information and what it reveals about God and use it to share with people who God is?
Well, I think the best way is to arouse curiosity, ask questions. I mean, when you look at nature, do you realize that there's a redemptive message? Do you understand what redemption is? Do you understand our need for that? And of course, they'll say, well, give me some examples. And so you can begin to list a few of the examples. I find what's effective is to talk to people about the thermodynamic laws, or what most lay people call the law of decay, or Murphy's Law, and basically show that if the decay rate in the universe were even the tiniest bit greater or the tiniest bit less, we wouldn't have stars and planets, and life would be impossible. Mm. But it's exactly fine-tuned to allow God to eliminate evil and suffering once and for all. And it's also fine-tuned to communicate to us our need for something beyond the universe to redeem us from our sin and evil. Wow. And so starting there, I think, is a good way to go. And I find the best way is actually to ask questions. Have you ever thought about why there's so much decay in the universe? Mm-hmm. Why a loving God would expose us to so much decay? I mean, it sounds bad to have all this decay going on, but it's actually for our benefit.
To dig deeper, take a look at Hugh's blog. Go to reasons.org and search Today's New Reason to Believe. Now, let's listen in as visiting scholar Kenny Rhodes unpacks the question, does religion appeal only to the marginalized?
Why does religion appeal more to poor, weak, vulnerable, young, ill-depressed, and ostracized people? Could religious promises be more of a temptation to these people?
Right off the bat, I'm reminded of what Queen Elizabeth, and I'm not sure where she is in as far as the history of England is concerned, but when she read that scripture that talks about, not many were rich, not many were wealthy, but God used the humble things of this world to profound the wise. She says that she was thankful for that phrase, not many noble, because at least there was an opening for a few that were noble. And it seems like the Christian faith is made for the down and out and those that struggle. And I think it's the design of God. It really insults the pride of the human experience. And God likes to use the simple things to profound the wise. And He does that. There is some wisdom in that, and sometimes I don't understand. I mean, it would be great if we could have guys like Stephen Hawking out there preaching the gospel and being able to answer everybody's questions and, deal with everything on a total academic level. But God has chosen to use the weak things and the things that look unwise in order to bring about His wisdom. And that's what the scripture tells us. It's the wisdom of God to do things such as this. And so that's one of the thoughts that I have to that question.
Well, and your point about Queen Elizabeth and that idea that there's still that opening. When you go to the book of Revelation and you have the picture of everybody that has been rescued by Christ worshiping around the throne, it talks about people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And I think the implication is that everybody is going to be represented.
Right.
And so, for example, many people will operate under the view that scientists simply reject belief in God, that the rate of unbelief among scientists is very high. Well, it is compared to the general public or population, but still, the statistics show about 30%, 35% of scientists believe in a personal God, and another 15% believe in a higher impersonal power. So about half of the people that would call themselves scientists have some kind of spiritual orientation. And so that doesn't sound to me like that the gospel or the Christian faith doesn't appeal to people that are successful, that are intelligent, that are well accomplished. There's a lot of examples of people that are very well to do that readily embrace the gospel.
Right.
I think to your point, many times it's when people are weak and poor and vulnerable and ill and depressed or ostracized that their real need as a human being becomes exposed.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Where you can't avoid those things that really reflect your real need in life by the distractions of wealth and success and power.
Right.
Those things can be very distracting and very addictive and keep you from recognizing your true need. But invariably, even people in those positions ultimately find that life is meaningless and without purpose, no matter what they attain in terms of power or wealth or success.
Right.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Justin Brierley. So awesome that you're here.
Thank you.
You're the host of Unbelievable, the radio program and podcast. Tell us a bit about that.
So Unbelievable is a show that's been going for about 13 years in the UK on Premier Christian Radio. And I bring Christians and non-Christians together for dialogue and debate.
Yeah.
I host these conversations on a weekly basis. And the fantastic thing is it's not just Christians we reach through the radio station, but through the podcast, many non-Christians, atheists, agnostics, people of other faiths have started listening and engaging with the show as well.
All right, wonderful. We love what you're doing with Unbelievable,
Thank
and
you.
we're so excited to have you here. We want to talk about kind of some talking points. Since you interact with atheists, agnostics, people of different faiths quite often, we'd love to hear kind of some talking points. If you're talking with someone who doesn't believe in the God of the Bible, what are some 3 questions that you might pose to them?
I mean, the first one I would want to pose is, what do you believe about reality? Because I think very often Christians think that all of the burden of proof is on them to kind of defend their own beliefs about God and the supernatural. But most atheists I meet, they have their own set of beliefs. Very often it's called naturalism. It's the idea that all that exists is matter in motion, the physical forces in the universe. But of course that has a lot of consequences. It means that there's no overarching purpose to anything. We don't know where the universe came from, where it's going. And there's all kinds of interesting elements about an atheistic worldview. And so I would want to ask firstly an atheist, how did you arrive at those beliefs? Is it just something you kind of were taught? Is it just something you assumed about reality? And that might then itself lead into an interesting conversation about why they believe what they believe and why I believe what I believe.
Right.
And I think that the job of the Christian apologist, the Christian thinker, is to say, well, we've got 2 different ways of looking at the world here, the Christian way and the atheistic way. Which actually has the evidence in favor of it? And in my view, it's actually Christianity that has the best evidence. And I would start with something like you and me, human existence. Okay,
Yeah.
How did we get here?
No, definitely.
Does the atheist have a good explanation for that? And most atheists would say, well, we're just basically here by chance.
Right.
We just got lucky kind of in the lottery of biology and the universe. But then I'd want to point them to the actual science and say, okay, well, when you look at what it took for us to be here, you look at the fine tuning of the universe, what was required in order for chemistry to get going, in order for anything that approximates to life to be able to exist in the universe, it is the unlikeliness of it is on an order of magnitudes that's almost unimaginable.
Right.
So the idea that we're here by chance, well, when you look at the odds, it just doesn't seem very likely that could be the explanation. For me, the Christian story that we're here on purpose because of a designer looks a lot more consistent with the actual evidence we see in front of us.
I love how you start though with what do you believe and starting that conversation, but then you ultimately lead to really what we're here for, kind of science apologetics. Like that is such an important tool to have when we're talking with people. We won't just point them to verses in the Bible. Being equipped, knowing what the science says, I think is crucial to be able to answer questions.
Absolutely, and most of the people I meet, especially really skeptical people, they love science. That's their big thing. So I think if you can start with science, you're already on winning ground, because they're going to take you a little bit more seriously. They're going to realize, okay, it's not just, oh, the Bible says it, therefore I believe it. It's actually, we're doing something which is integrating both what we find in Scripture and what we find in the universe.
Right. That's a great just approach in talking with non-Christians and atheists. You talked about our human existence and how we would come into existence. How then would we find human value and human purpose when we're talking with an atheist and where they get human value and human purpose? How do you approach that?
Well, this is one of my favorite things to talk about with a non-Christian, with an atheist, is because most of the time when we look out there, we can see how the universe seems to point towards us as having this extraordinary nature and the fact that we're here. But then when we look from out there to inwards, we also recognize that most of us have this innate belief in the sanctity of human life, that there is this thing called human dignity and value, and we enshrine it in things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We say there are certain ways you should treat other human beings. And my big question then for the atheist is, well, how do you justify that? If we are just here as a result of, a random sort of chance, essentially, and really we've got no more claim for, special regard than any other part of the evolutionary tree of life, why do you privilege humans so much? Why do you say that there are certain ways humans should treat each other? And for me, I've never found a satisfactory answer for that on an atheistic worldview. But yet Christianity seems to be there with a ready answer to that question. So why do we believe in the intrinsic dignity of every person, whether they're a street kid or a penthouse billionaire, that they all deserve the same kind of rights and respect? I think it's because we're all made in the image of God. I think that is a good explanation for why we have this sense of the importance of human dignity and value. In fact, so valued by God that God came to be a human. That's the extraordinary thing about the Christian story, and died and rose again for us. So for me, I would want to ask someone, why do you think that humans are special? Because I think when people actually think about it, it's very hard to justify if we are really all just boiled down to matter in motion,
Well, thank you so much for that. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg. You have plenty more in your book, Unbelievable. And where can people find you? Besides your book, Unbelievable, how can they find you?
Apart from the book, there is the weekly radio show and podcast. It's available wherever you get podcasts from. You're just looking for Unbelievable with a question mark. You can also find the YouTube channel now. We do a lot of these debates and dialogues in our video studio. So if you search on YouTube for Unbelievable, again, with a question mark, that's a good way to find it.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to hear more from Justin Brierley, search Unbelievable with the question mark and check out his wonderful radio show.
Hello, Jeff Zwerenk here, and welcome back to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas and help you be more confident in the truth of Christianity. Today I'm joined by Dr. Darren Williams, and we're going to be discussing the question, does quantum mechanics remove the need for the universe having a cause? Darren, it's good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So I just kind of give a little bit of background. I know you're a professor of physical chemistry at Sam Houston State University. You've been,
yes.
What sort of classes do you teach
I've been
there?
teaching physical chemistry for the last 15 years there, which is quantum mechanics and spectroscopy, and then in the spring, thermodynamics.
So let's kind of explore that quantum mechanics, because this is quantum mechanics is just weird when you get right down to it.
It is. It's a mysterious area of science, and I think a lot of people are curious about it.
So I know there are people that talk about how quantum mechanics can get rid of causation or seems to have things happen without a cause. What are some of the things in quantum mechanics that lead people to make statements like that?
One of the cleanest examples is radioactive decay. We know the properties of lots of atoms and the statistics associated with the group of atoms, but when it comes down to a particular atom, we don't have any math that describes when that atom will decay.
So the idea being, well, it's just sitting around there and it just decays without any
without
cause,
a cause.
Okay.
Yes, and so I think that is a mystery to some folks.
So I mean, just kind of going deeper, it seems like most of quantum mechanics has this statistical nature.
Yes.
Just due to this, I'll kind of explore this a little bit. The superposition idea that things, at least in the mathematics we use, things are both like decayed and undecayed at the same time.
Right. You have, let's say, a particular particle in a lower state. This whole word of quantum mechanics, quantum just means small jump or packet or discrete difference in energy level. So if an atom goes from this level to that level with interaction of light, you have 3 waves interacting with each other.
Okay.
We don't know exactly when that will jump. We know statistically how it will behave with a group of atoms, but a particular atom interacting with light, we couldn't say that it will absorb or not absorb.
So just kind of as a practical measure standpoint, it sounds like when we're looking at thousands of atoms, we can predict very accurately what's going to happen. When we're looking at an individual atom per se with the quantum mechanics, we really don't know what's going to happen.
On a particular individual atom, yes. And we have everyday products. If anyone's ever come into your home with a laser thermometer and measured the air vents to see if your air conditioning is working, that's the statistical behavior of the hot atoms in that air vent. Then we know that very well, and we can tell you the temperature of the air coming through that vent. But a particular system, a particular atom, or a particular photon of light, there's no math to describe a quantum jump.
Okay. So let's kind of delve into that. So if we've got this atom that's for all intents and purposes just sitting there and spontaneously decays.
Correct.
For all intents and purposes, we have no idea the mechanism behind it, if you will.
Right.
There's no traceable cause, if you will.
Right.
I'm gathering people extrapolate that and say if quantum mechanics does that, perhaps universes just pop into existence in the same way. So they may have a beginning, a definable event, but there's no cause, if you will.
Right. This was a famous debate at Purdue between Alex Rosenberg and William Lane Craig, talking about if quantum mechanics has things that happen without a cause, then perhaps universes could happen without a cause.
So what do we do with that? Do we just say, well, yeah, things happen without a cause? That seems to be a big thing from a philosophical statement, that things that happen have a cause.
Yes.
That's how science works most of the time.
That's right, and that's a critical piece of Dr. Craig's argument. He says things that begin to exist have a cause. That's premise one. And if you can attack that premise, then his whole Kalam argument falls.
Yeah, well, it's not just his. That's
right.
It's long-standing philosophical argument.
Causality, yes.
Right. So why is it that people seem willing to give up causality, or what is it that allows them to think causality is not that fundamental?
I think it's an improper extrapolation.
Okay.
Just because you don't know the cause or can't mathematically write out the cause of a nuclear decay does not mean there is not a cause. Mm-hmm. You see the disconnect? Just because you don't know the cause doesn't mean that there is no cause.
Okay.
And I think that's the jump they're making. They're saying because we don't know there's a cause or a particular cause of this atom's decay, there is no cause. I don't think that's a legitimate extrapolation.
Okay, so in some sense, it's kind of, quantum mechanics allows us to mathematically describe what's happening, even though we don't understand the basis of why it's happening.
Yes.
And so the extrapolation of saying because it's happening and we can describe the mathematics says we don't know why, then you can say there is no cause. Is the wrong extrapolation.
Yes, I think it's the wrong extrapolation. And there are some interesting experiments in quantum mechanics where clearly making the measurement causes the system to behave a certain way. We call it the observer effect. Okay. So in making the measurement, you actually interfere with the system and you cause it to do. You are kind of the cause as the observer. And that's some philosophically laden language there too. Mm-hmm. How can you cause an event that you're then observing? But that's where we get into this collapse of the wave function you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
There's this uncertainty as to whether, let's say, this particular system has emitted a photon of light or not. But by observing it, you see the photon of light, then you can conclude that it did emit.
Well, and that's one of the very bizarre things about quantum mechanics is that there are no just independent systems, if you will. The very fact that we're observing the system actually influences what's going on in the system.
Right. So I think this observer effect is a very important part of quantum mechanics.
Okay. So, so somebody brings us along and says, hey, universe doesn't have a cause. How would you respond to that?
I would say, first of all, we don't know that.
Okay.
It's impossible to know that. We'd have to be outside of the universe to observe the whole system, thinking from an empirical standpoint. But even some have proposed, because we're here to observe the universe, we're the causes of the universe.
Okay.
Which is a stretch,
bizarre,
I wasn't around
okay.
14 billion years ago, but this whole idea of a causal chain going backwards in time because of the observer effect is problematic in a sense, because it pretends that we're the only observers. But yes, we can participate in an experiment in a quantum sense and be the observer that causes a wave function to collapse and a particular result to come to bear. But this leaves out the possibility that's very consistent with the Christian worldview of God as that observer as well. So what are you as an observer? You're an agent. You're causing things to happen. And so in your agency or causality of interacting with this system, you're taking a role in it. And I think God's role in creating and sustaining the universe is consistent with quantum mechanics.
That raises some interesting theological questions, but that idea that God is active in creation, I don't know whether observing is quite the right term.
Right.
But
we would say omnipresent. These are the Christian terms, all-knowing. So if a God is omnipresent and all-knowing, then he's everywhere in all time and space, and even beyond that. And he's all-knowing. There's many verses, Matthew 10, when Jesus is talking to his followers, he says, not a hair falls from your head without God's knowing it. Other places say, in like Colossians, where God sustains the universe. So these are very interesting statements, and when you look at quantum mechanics, it's still consistent with a sustaining influence throughout the whole universe.
Well, thanks, Darren. I appreciate your comments.
Yes.
Quantum mechanics is just weird, and at some level it seems like it's a threat to the Christian faith. But when we really get in and explore what we know and what we don't know and what quantum mechanics has to say, we find that it really is consistent with the Christian faith, and in fact, it points towards a creator. I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and look for an article called "Does a Universe from Nothing Mean God Doesn't Exist?" And you'll get some tools that will help equip you to use this weird thing of quantum mechanics to actually argue for the truth of the Christian faith.
And that does it for us this week on 2819.
We hope that you've had as much fun as we have, and we hope that you've learned how to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And remember, if you want to support resources like 2819 and some of the other videos and projects we have going on here at RTB, you can visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, grab your phones right now as you're watching or listening, and find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. You get to see some cool behind-the-scenes stuff, so be sure to do that.
See you all next time.
Bye.